Hey, welcome to the Virtually Speaking podcast. My name is Pete Fletcher, and joining me as usual is my good friend, Mr. John Nicholson. John, how you doing, buddy?
Good. I'm feeling a bit tanned. I just got back from Mexico. I got some color, feeling fancy.
I was so jealous. I was looking at your pictures. Meanwhile, I had the flu, and I'm looking at your pictures of you just hanging out on the water, drinking all types of adult beverages. Yeah, I was a little jealous.
Yeah, I forgot to put in PTO, so I just had, Bing and ChatGPT answer all my emails for me. It was great.
I like it, man. That's a beautiful thing. Well, John, I'm excited about this one. This is a topic that you and I have not spent a lot of time talking about. We definitely talk about a lot of the different services that VMware offers, but this is not one that we spent a ton of time on, and that is the Azure VMware Solutions. And so we're gonna bring on some experts to talk that, starting with from VMware, an old friend of the podcast, Mr. Emad Younis. Emad, welcome back.
Hey, guys, thanks for having me. John, that tan, we're going to have to talk, maybe compare tans or something like that.
Yeah. Comparatively speaking, it is a tan.
Yeah, mine does not fade away, though. There's a difference.
I like it. So Emad, thank you so much for joining us and representing the VMware side of this Azure VMware solution. Joining us from the Microsoft side to talk about this Azure VMware solution is Principal Technical Product Manager from Microsoft, Joe Sarabia. Joe, welcome to the huddle. Or Joe, welcome to the Virtually Speaking podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's my first time here, and I'm glad to be joining. And John, I got to say, with ChatGPT doing your heavy lifting, I'm surprised you came back at all.
I'm looking for a podcast language model. We got to figure that out. It's got to blend kind of goofball jokes and hard hitting technical questions. We gotta we'll have to train that.
Yeah. I do want to talk about Azure VMware Solutions, but now that we're talking ChatGPT, what is anyone in the call here? What is the most use you've gotten out of that so far?
So I've used it after writing a few, let's say, abstracts.
Yeah,
it's pretty interesting to see what the ChatGPT will come back with, right? And the good thing is you can say, okay, here's abstract 1, here's abstract 2. Hey, give me the best of both abstracts, right? But what I found is you still have to review it, right? I mean, you can't just willy-nilly take what it's going to output and post it, right? You still got to review, change some words. But for the most part, it does a pretty good job.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the Microsoft version.
I just want Microsoft to be able to do my PowerPoints. That's all.
Yeah, that's getting closer, I think. I had a win with ChatGPT just this week, actually, where I'm decent with Excel. I don't know that I'm an expert. And I was having trouble figuring out how to do this analysis. And it was a workbook that I got from somewhere else. The data was what it was, and I had to deal with it. And I had fiddled with trying to write this formula that I just knew it was pretty dicey. And I asked, without any special prompt engineering, what I was trying to solve in plain language, and it spat back a formula, an array formula, which I don't know array formulas in Excel at all. And I was like, whoa. And like Emad said, one little typo in it, but solved it. And I've been asking for a couple of weeks, and no one knew how to kind of get the data I was looking for out of it. And ChatGPT did it in like 12 seconds.
Yeah. I've seen some impressive use cases for it for sure. But yeah, I think for me so far, it's mainly been just to, hey, I want to start a project on something. Give me something to start with, and then it gives me probably about 50% and maybe 60%, and then and the rest is on you. But yeah, still a fun toy.
Pete, didn't it get a VMware Explorer session accepted for you?
It actually did, yeah. The Virtually Speaking podcast session for Explore, just for kicks. I was like, all right, I'm just going to I'm going to almost make this thing 100% ChatGPT. And with the exception of a few words, my abstract is from ChatGPT.
Nice.
So, yeah, good stuff. But yeah, we're not here to talk about ChatGPT. We are talking about something that does simplify your life if you are a VMware customer, and that is Azure VMware Solution. So, Joe, before we dive too deep, set the level here for us. What exactly is AVS?
Yeah, it's a solution. Essentially, I like to call it a managed VMware solution. You can think of it almost as VMware as a service or a platform as a service offering that's combined between VMware and Microsoft. We can get into those details later if you like. But really, we think that this is the best of both worlds that allows customers to maintain their investment in VMware technology, tooling, operational know-how with the flexibility and power of the cloud. And, really, we see it as facilitating the journey that we see many customers taking, to the cloud and potentially beyond. So we see customers that are just, I need to shut down my data center for a variety of reasons. So we can accommodate those use cases. It could be, I want some DR as a service. We can do that too. And what a lot of customers are telling us, though, is that this is really a stopping point on their way to some, later destination where they really embrace more, let's say, cloud native type technologies. So it's a really interesting time. And, I think that if you reflect on the history of VMware and VMware customers, there's always been a Microsoft component to that between, Windows, SQL Active Directory, right? And bringing these worlds together, I think is really exciting. And we're seeing great traction with our customers so far.
I think it's now become an easier stepping point, right? Because imagine before when it was like, okay, I need to bring my VMware VM to the cloud, right? It wasn't just simply choose a cloud and migrate, right? It was, okay, now I actually have to think about modernization and getting this workload into these native services. But now we're allowing customers to leverage that same vCenter that they're used to on-prem, right? The same ESXi host. So that same view that they typically have in an on-premises data center, they're getting with an AVS environment. And in the addition, what Joe talked about, what I like to add to it is that whole lifecycle aspect, right? Today, as administrators, right? I mean, we've all been administrators at some point in our career, and I can tell you, we all didn't really enjoy having to stay up late to update vCenter and then update, thousands of hosts or patch them. And that's the beauty of this service, is because it is a managed service by Microsoft. Microsoft will take care of all the lifecycle aspects of the components, right? So the vCenter, ESXi hosts, the NSX manager, right? Now the exception here will be the HCX, right? Because the HCX is considered, and we can talk more about that later, it's considered what's quote unquote an add-on, which I think that word is a bit misleading because HCX is included in free, right?
Yeah.
But SRM is also an add-on. But there are a lot of benefits that you typically don't get in a traditional environment that you do with AVS. And then in addition to that, the benefits of if you have older versions of Windows or SQL, right? Say around 2008, now there's a benefit to extended support, right? And then Azure also has benefits to Windows. I think they actually have, Joe, I think it's like a Windows service, if you will, right?
It's like a Windows server for Azure, where there's these elements like Emad is talking about, where from a licensing perspective, or even now more recently from a technology perspective, if you run Windows Server as a VM inside of Azure, there's different capabilities you get than if that's Windows Server running, potentially on-prem or running in another cloud provider. So you put all those things together, and we see it as a differentiator. There's another thing, Emad, you brought to my mind about lifecycle. There's other things aside from updates and upgrades that we do that really ease the lifecycle, I would say. We have a feature that we call automated host replacement. So the idea here is that, we detect things going awry. I don't know, like a dim fails or some PSOD, something going wrong with the host, where we have basically automated tooling that will watch for that to happen. And we can, rotate a new one in, pull the old one out, triage that, repair it, replace it, whatever the case is. So there's that aspect of the life cycle too, that people doing administration on-prem might have to deal with that you don't in this type of solution.
Okay, so let's peel back a little bit of what you said there, Emad. You get a VMware environment. So does it look exactly like if I deployed it on-prem? Like, do I have my host, and what is the storage? Is it vSAN? Like, is it like a VCF environment that you're giving me, or what exactly? When I hit deploy, for the various packages, I'm sure there's multiple, but like when I hit deploy for a traditional AVS environment and I log into vCenter, what do I see?
Yeah, so the first thing is you're going to start off within the Azure portal, right? You go in, select, you'll just do a search for Azure VMware Solution, come in, and you'll start the process in regards to deployment. There's a few questions it'll ask, kind of give me the resource group name, give me the network that you want to deploy. It's a /26 that gets carved up, right, for all the various components that get deployed. And later on, as you have other add-ons like SRM or HCX, it will leverage from that segment as well. Now, as part of the deployment, you get a vCenter server. You'll get a host. Standard is 3 nodes. Now, as part of your subscription, right, you have a quota. And depending on your quota and your subscription, you can start off with more, but typically it's a 3-node deployment, right? And as part of the deployment, they leverage NSX for all the plumbing networking and all that. vSAN is the back-end storage, but now customers actually have a choice to add additional external storage. You can leverage NetApp today. I think it's out of preview. It's been announced, right? So you can leverage NetApp for additional storage if you don't want to add more nodes, right? So that's typically the environment. Now you can deploy that, from the GUI. You could deploy it using, Azure CLI, Bicep. There's also ARM templates, right? So choose your automation tool of choice. And now, as part of the post deployment, you have HCX, right, or SRM, depending on your use cases. So HCX, the tool of choice for migration, SRM, for DR, right? Now HCX, again, I use the word add-on, but HCX is included as part of the service, right? Where SRM is basically you're going to have to bring additional licensing to get that enabled.
So you'd bring your VM license packs for that, and then you could add that on.
So even if you have SRM licensing today, you're going to have to go through the process of converting them to like cloud SRM licensing or something.
Oh yeah, there's the portable cloudless SRM licensing deal. So no, fair.
Yeah.
And one more lifecycle management question real quick. So like, I'm assuming when you say lifecycle management is handled by Microsoft, we're talking about just the management of the host, not like if I add, more environments, like, or is it every host that's in there gets lifecycle management handled by Microsoft? Is that how that works?
So the customer is in charge of the VMs, right? That's the whole beauty of this is, as a customer, my job is to focus solely on the workloads, right?
Yeah.
And I let Microsoft handle the environment itself. And when I say handle, I'm the hosts, the vCenter, the patching, the NSX manager, all that. Now, HCX is different, right? Because as the customer, I need to update the HCX components, right? That's on me. But the rest of the core environment, if you will, is handled by Microsoft, and they do provide you alerting and things like that. So it's not a willy-nilly operation. You know in advance when it's happening.
Nice.
I was smiling over here because we have this. We have a matrix actually that we show customers that addresses this exact point because the line of demarcation is not always necessarily immediately clear, because it is really the shared responsibility model. So typically it's around the cluster where we try to treat the cluster itself as a managed entity. And so the life cycle of hosts coming in and out of there as they fail, for example, or need to be upgraded, that's something that we do. But if a customer is trying to add it, they have to request that, but then we automate that workflow. But like Emad says, once you get essentially below the cluster level, and you're dealing with VMs, including, like patching. We get those questions sometimes like, hey, do you patch all our VMs for us? No, we don't. We'll patch the host, but the VMs are entirely the customer responsibility.
Yeah, VM tools, VM compatibility now, formerly hardware, that's all on the customer.
Well, but that's something that the urgency to patch VM tools, I feel like, is slightly less severe as time's gone on. It's something to where if you're running a slightly older VM tool, I mean, I guess there's memory TPS or some things that used to require it, but it's not quite as generally as urgent. But that is nice. The whole construct of, if I've got a problem with a host or something, hardware just appears. Cause that's something that, when we used to run data centers in the office, like it was generally not that big a deal to go wander into wherever that was. But then it's like, oh, let's put in a colo. And increasingly people wanted nicer colos and wanted better connectivity. And that colo started getting farther and farther to where it's not that uncommon for people's primary data center to not be within an hour driving distance, maybe even requiring a flying trip. And thinking back to like, I would actually go fly out to go replace hardware. Like that's insane now, or maybe you did remote hands, but like, you were basically trying to describe to someone who had no clue what was going on in your rack. Be like, hey, there's this box and it's shaped like this, and I need you to pull this. No, not that one. You crashed that. Like, versus this kind of like automated system, and Microsoft, this is their fleet ops. They know what they're doing. They know what these servers are. It's not just me getting some random, college kid who's working a night shift for remote hands, swapping things out or trying to troubleshoot a live system with me. And like, I'm on a questionable phone call. This just sounds like a much nicer operational model, even though, like you say, there's some joint custody and joint ownership. This sounds still a lot better than 100% ownership. But I had to go get in my car on Thanksgiving and go drive 200 miles.
Well, not only that, but think of the procurement like you just talked about, right? I mean, how many customers have hosts on standby, right? Or the amount of time it takes end to end when you say, hey, I need 10 new blades or 10 new servers or whatever, right? I mean, that takes, at least anywhere from 3 maybe to 6 months on average, and depending on the day and time that we live in these days, right? It could be even longer before you
or
get
you might not
something.
get homogenous hosts because
Mhm.
I'm sorry, like, I won't name or shame any specific OEMs, but there's OEMs that like they change their drive part numbers every 6 months. And Microsoft, I know you guys are pretty good at forecasting your purchasing, and y'all can actually go to whoever it is you get your discs from and say, hey, I need enough of these the last 5 years. Like, it's a very different model. It used to be a thing. Like the hardware components did not change that often. Like, a 10,000 RPM drive was kind of a 10,000 RPM drive. And it's 600 gig. We went from 6 to 900. And, it was I feel like hardware moved a lot slower, but as hardware's moved faster, if you want a consistent and reliable operating model, you gotta be ready to buy in obscene quantities that just normal people can't do. Otherwise, you're gonna end up with 3 generations of hosts and 6 different drives if you're doing one-off purchase orders or you're doing just-in-time expansion.
Yeah.
The beauty here is it's a simple click, and you can, again, depending on your quota, you can add additional hosts, right? I mean, it's pretty slick.
Joe, I know that there used to be an offering for Azure VMware Solutions that was provided that was completely set up by Cloud Simple. Is this the same thing? Has that changed?
It is not the same thing, but it has the same name, and I'm really glad that you brought this up because this conversation comes up all the time, actually. So the official name was Azure VMware Solution by Cloud Simple of the first offering. I think that the history of Cloud Simple and what happened there is pretty well known. They ended up in Google land to become GCP, or at least parts of it, to my understanding. And so this offering is really something quite different because at the time there were constraints on what we could do as a provider of a VMware service that came out of VMware. And so that was just, it had to be operated by a third party. We couldn't operate it ourselves. And that was the offering. So it was engineered by them. We sold it. They supported it. And it was frankly like a complex model. This one though is the next generation of the offering. And it's similar really only in name and in primary function, operating as this like VMware as a service offering. But this is something that we have engineered jointly between us, and VMware. So there was no third party involved. And I think from our perspective, this gave us some additional flexibility because part of what we're looking at, back to the conversation earlier, is we had customers that actually tried to, VMware's everywhere. I don't know the number now, but I think it's tens of millions of VMs still, or VMware VMs are on-prem. And we had customers that tried to move to the cloud and they tried to do the modernization to cloud with something like IaaS. And some of those customers, failed. Some number of those customers have come back now to Azure VMware Solution using tools like HCX that really facilitates the process. But now in this offering, because we're jointly engineering it and it's a first party offering, there is more of an opportunity to provide, I would say, like deeper integration into native Microsoft services. And that is something that, if a customer so desires, the same customer that tried a few years back and was not able to make this transition, now they've, moved thousands of VMs using HCX, and they're looking at not only, how do I modernize into, say, some native services for compute and storage, but there could be things from a management perspective that could be beneficial too. They might not just have, AVS in their Azure environment. They could have other things. And so we're really looking at, things like unified management stories that we can provide across the cloud surface that is encompassing of things like AVS VMs and other, VMs as well. So, it's similar, right? It started off in the same part of VMware, and there's this bundle that we get, but we built our own offering on top of it, and that's what we call Azure VMware Solution today.
I like it. Joint solution. Does that mean there's joint support, or does it just like go to Microsoft?
It depends. I'll give my answer, and then I'll hand off to Emad, because it depends on which part that we're talking about. But I think this is one area where, we really wanted to make it easy for our existing and, potentially new Microsoft customers. Like I talked about before, though, even if you're not an Azure customer, but you're a Microsoft, customer, there's a lot of those Microsoft and VMware customers that were existing today. And so that we felt that it was important to give those customers a good option to say, hey, I want to buy it from Microsoft. I want it to be supported by Microsoft. And like we talked about, jointly engineered by Microsoft. So generally speaking, for AVS, when you need support, you come to us. And then if it becomes necessary, there's a handoff that can occur when we need to escalate for particular cases. So if we run into, like a bug with NSX, for example, it's not our code. We can't fix it. We need VMware's help with that. And there's other parts. I think I'll let Emad talk about the HCX and SRM component, because that's another one where, it really depends which part of the solution we're talking about.
Yeah, so like Joe said, typically a customer would contact Microsoft, right, and go through Microsoft support. And Microsoft support will handle the escalation to VMware. So the customer doesn't need to deal with the escalation. They just deal with the initial ticket. And from that perspective, when, like Joe said, if they run into a bug, if they ran into some HCX issues which they've ran into in the past, they'll contact VMware support, work with VMware support until the escalation or the issue gets resolved. So again, it all goes through Microsoft support, which is a great process, right? Versus the customer having to be that intermediate between the two. So they try to make it as smooth as possible for the customer.
Yeah, fair enough. Microsoft's got lots of experience with support. I know I've worked with them for many years. It's a well-oiled machine, so that's good stuff. Use cases. Is this something that's good for just about any VMware use case that we can think of? Like, I know we've got some corner cases inside of VMware, whether it's using GPUs or other, modern applications with Tanzu. So like, what use cases in the VMware portfolio is this, targeted towards?
I mean, data center extension, right? It's a common use case, data center evacuation, right? Some customers have used this based off region proximity, right? Trying to get into a particular region. Virtual desktops is another one that comes up a lot.
I hear that one a lot. So you could run Horizon on top of that. As you run your own Horizon, or is that like a managed VDI offering?
I'll let Joe talk more around the Horizon aspect there, but I do know that they now have capabilities in regards to Office 365. If you're running, virtual desktops within Azure. So I'm not a VDI expert, and nor do I plan to become one. So I'll pass that baton to Joe.
Yeah, and Joe, before you answer, when John reminded me, you reminded me of the Office 365. Are companies still deploying Exchange locally? Is that still a thing? Or I mean, Office 365 makes the most sense, but like, are there companies that are still like, nah, we're gonna roll our own. This is it. We're doing Exchange in house. Is that still a thing?
I hope not. It comes up though, because I actually remember this thing. It's really rare that I hear about it. But maybe like a month ago, there was a customer that was asking this question of, migrating their Exchange VM that's on-prem. And I'm like, whoa. Let's back up a second and talk about, like, just because you can doesn't mean you should, folks.
As a VMware employee, I'll show up and be like, yeah, just move the mailboxes 365. We don't want that either. Like,
so
why?
Somebody did that actually, is they responded. It was like in Teams, of course, because we're Microsoft, and someone responded with the link to the article that describes how to do that. And they're like, stop it. Just migrate your mailboxes already. So I think there's some holdouts, but it's an interesting point because we get customers. I'm really surprised by this, where still to this day, we have customers that are running 5.5 environments and 6.0 environments. And we get this from the field like almost weekly about like HCX isn't going to support 5.5. How do I migrate these people? And I was like, what are they doing with 5.5? And so I think you get government entities is a really good example of a place where funding and skilling can be issues, for example. So it wouldn't surprise me if it was a government entity with this old Exchange VM. And I mean, there's ways of getting around it essentially, but I think there probably are people running really, really, old workloads eager to get to cloud, and they've just kind of got some tech debt basically that they have to deal with in getting over. And we do our best to help our customers through those scenarios as we're able to.
I mean, I think there may be some like sovereignty, like weird stuff involving subpoenas. Was someone explained to me why they're running Exchange on-prem. I was like, okay, lawyers, anytime there's like a bad architecture decision, I'm like, there's lawyers involved. So, maybe, but yeah,
or just
probably more tech debt.
That can happen, right? I mean,
yeah,
but no. So we're going to get some angry emails to podcast@vmware.com of like, why are you still running Exchange? Like, no.
Yeah, no, Exchange is great. Exchange is great, people, but it is advanced since the early days.
I guess I can take my Exchange certifications off the wall.
Hey, I've got my MCSE books are actually right next to me. The 4.0 ones. I'm dating myself there. I get it, and I think that is. We didn't really touch on that, but that's another thing about some customers that we see. There is initial reluctance about the server hugger crew, if you will. Like, well, what am I going to do if Microsoft's doing all this stuff for me? But I think really done well, what we see in organizations as they mature is it opens up really avenues for them to do like new things in their career that's higher value to the organization. And we're seeing some of those patterns play out. It takes time, right? Like enterprise customers, in my view, are not the swiftest customers out there. But we're starting to see the shift over time where, they kind of get the VMware estate in, if you will, or the vSphere estate anyway, into AVS. And now they're starting to look at, well, how do I really make use of some of these other capabilities that cloud provides? And this is the other thing that we didn't touch on earlier that I want to emphasize is this idea of running kind of some hybrid thing where I decompose my application into different parts and I leave some on-prem and some on cloud. Yes, that could work in certain scenarios, but often that latency would be, really too high for it to fit, many use cases. And so here where you've got this adjacency of basically, VMware living inside of, a few hundred microseconds away from all these like really crazy selection of services that can do interesting things. Now that we've shortened that link between, our traditional estate and the new cloud to something that's, basically, in the same data center, I think it opens up really interesting possibilities and broadens the use cases that folks can adopt in their environment, or that allows them to realize this kind of modernization journey, but do it in a stepwise function so they don't have to big bang it all. You can move your front end, your back end independently without having to sacrifice performance.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing they get is that infrastructure modernization, right? By simply migrating, to something like an AVS. And then over time, they have access to a number of native services that they can leverage, right? And especially like when you look at something like an AVS that's right there, close proximity to Azure native services. I mean, it's no brainer that you look at your SQL DBs, right? You start looking at your Windows servers, things like that you can actually easily start encompassing native services, and then over time you could look at other services, right? The other thing that I want to highlight that we haven't talked about is when it comes to manageability, something that came out. I mean, it's been out for a minute, but it's not too long. Arc, right? I really like what Microsoft is starting to do with Arc. The capability of managing both my workloads within Azure, plus my workloads that reside within my AVS environment, so within vCenter. I can manage it from Arc within the Azure portal, right? Now, it's not reinventing the wheel with vCenter. I mean, there's things you can do, power on, all that stuff. I can't get to a VM console, but again, this is something new, right? And they're still working and adding capabilities. But the fact now is I'm going to one centralized portal to manage these two different types of workloads, right? So that's a pretty big direction and a good start.
I hadn't heard of ARC. What does that stand for?
Azure Resource Center. I don't know. I would have to look. It's normally stylized with a capital A though and a lowercase RC. So I never thought of it as being an acronym or a three-letter acronym. I'll have to look.
Okay.
Stumped me.
And that's the manageability for your environment. You would go through Arc.
Yeah, the idea is so Emad was talking about it. Is we have a concept, and it works for on-prem too, by the way. Is we have this concept of a resource bridge, and that's basically a way to proxy vSphere resources via vSphere API into Azure to facilitate manageability. And so what this means is we do something called resource projection. And so when you have this resource bridge installed, it lets like Azure Resource Manager or Azure know about the resources that are there and makes them like, Azure aware. And then from the same place in the portal, like Emad is talking about, you could see your Azure IaaS VMs and your AVS VMs, side by side. So let's go back to the example that we were giving a minute ago where Emad talked about like, hey, we got this customer and they've decided we want to modernize by doing some sort of SQL PaaS. So we started off by using HCX to migrate that SQL VM in. And then kind of step two would be, all right, we're going to now migrate from the AVS VM into an Azure IaaS VM. But let's say there's other VMs for whatever reason that I've left inside of AVS. So historically, from a manageability perspective, I've got these two places to go. And this is what Arc is really trying to do, is bridge that divide. So now I can see in the portal, those things right next to each other. I can see my SQL PaaS stuff, or if I have a SQL VM or whatever, right next to the AVS ones, and manage them together, apply policy together. That's like the forward-looking vision. As Emad mentioned, this is a work in progress.
I like it. Very cool. Well, yeah, man, this is a pretty good introduction to Azure VMware Solutions. I don't want to take too much of your time. Is there going to be any presence at VMware Explore from an Azure VMware Solutions perspective? I'm sure there's got to be at least a booth or some presentations that we can share. Anything that you're aware of?
Having not used ChatGPT, I don't know if my submissions are going to get approved. So I wish I had known that a few weeks ago. I'll take it in mind for 2024. No, absolutely. We will have, to my knowledge, a booth at VMware Explorer. I almost said VMworld. I'm still working on that, guys. So we will have a booth. There will be some number of sessions. I don't know if they've finished. Maybe y'all would know better than I do if they've gone through the process of all the approvals. So last I heard is that was kind of ongoing. I think things were due and they were being reviewed. I've heard of a few. So there will certainly be some that are high level. We have, I think, someone from our senior leadership team for AVS coming in that will be joining, someone on the VMware side, much like, we're doing today with me and Emad, because it is jointly developed solution to talk about, some of the high level business and overview of the service. And then we did submit a few things. I think there was the two that I know of for sure. We do a What's New session every year. So in an hour, we try to tell you like everything we've done in the last year. So I think will be one of the co-presenters of that session.
Nice.
And then there's another one where, we could, I'm happy to come back if you guys want me back. We could do a whole other session dedicated to networking. This comes up a lot with customers, but we will do some sort of AVS networking session during the conference, because this is where we find customers spend a lot of time, and it just varies depending on how you're coming in. So like I mentioned, we have customers that are joint Microsoft and VMware customers, not Azure customers yet. Then we have customers who have an Azure presence because a different part of their organization has started one of these cloud projects, that maybe is moving slow.
Yeah.
And now we're trying to put AVS in on top of it. Things can get tricky in that scenario because, in cloud, we have these concepts around like landing zones and how you should architect things in a particular way. It's nice to start, from scratch where we can. That's not the reality. But when you have these hub and spoke models and you plug something like AVS in, there's a lot of considerations to factor in to how you do that design and potentially rework it. So that session will be, about that and some of the options you have there. Certainly encourage folks to attend that if you make the conference and you're able to.
Yeah,
and it's
absolutely.
interesting because networking, you have kind of in Azure networking, if you will, right? And then you have the connectivity options, right? That allows you to connect your on-prem environment to an AVS, right? So express route, right? Low latency, high bandwidth. We support VPN, which that's now opened a lot of doors, especially for regions that don't have express route capabilities or small remote offices, right? And including also SD-WAN. So definitely a lot of connectivity options to connect your on-premises environment and start migrating your workloads. And then once you get into AVS now, there's other connectivity options within the VNet and other ways to start, as Joe and I discussed, get creative.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, that's really good stuff. I'm going to leave links on the show notes of this page. So, Joe, Emad, please share as many as you can. I know there's got to be some opportunities for folks that are not going to VMware Explore to give this a shot, to give it a try. So I will leave links to learn more about Azure VMware Solutions on the show notes of this page. But with that, I want to thank Joe and Emad for joining us. John, anything else before we let these gentlemen go?
No, that was a lot. Now I'm feeling a little self-conscious about my tan, but I'll ask ChatGPT how I can improve it. So
it's probably because you have me side by side on the same screen.
Not a good look. Here, John, I'll help you look. Now you're side by side with me. You look great, but yeah,
there we go.
next to Emad, it's not doing you any favors. Joe, Emad, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.